Welcome to the Moral Premise Storycraft Podcast, Episode 2. Can Historical Fiction Be True? I'm your host, Stan Williams. The headlines read, "Lying is prevalent on the right and the left," claim fact-checkers. I wonder who's checking the fact-checkers. While preparing to print advance review copies of my historical novel, The Wizard Clip Haunting, I asked my followers for help fine-tuning the title and cover design. On the cover was the tagline, "The True Tale of an Early American Ghost Story." A follower raised the bane of fiction writers who base their work on historical events. She wrote to me, "If it's a true story, it's not a novel." My response was less concise. The commenter has served up a delicious morsel for discussion. What is true in historical fiction? Or, can historical fiction ever be true? I think so, for the same reasons I don't think so-called true accounts of history are absolutely true. Here are 6 things to ponder. 1. Everything, everywhere, all at once? In historical fiction, the reader is always wondering which parts are true, even as the reader assumes most of the telling is fiction. Why is that? Because it's impossible to tell a completely true story, if by true we mean all of the facts in the true chronological order, especially if many of the micro-facts occurred simultaneously and were somehow codependent on each other. Even to record all the physical events and their related minutiae would require too long of a book or too long of a movie, to think nothing of the internal and invisible thoughts, values, and motivations that caused the physical events. It seems to me that to tell an absolutely true story would require an accurate narrative about all such things in every conceivable crevice all at once. Of course, this is ludicrous in a practical sense. So what really is true? 2. Perspective. Since number 1 is impractical, if not impossible, we as writers favor our perspective or bias, which can result in a story that some would find totally fiction. The facts collected by different people from different perspectives, even though they are all eyewitnesses, always interpret or remember the true facts differently. We see this every day in reports of current events and in scientific interpretations of so-called objective and natural observations. And if we include recent understandings of quantum theory, reality gets a bad name real fast. In researching the particular historical novel I recently completed, I collected more than 30, well, actually it was more like 100, different narratives of the same historical event, some whole, most anecdotal. Some accounts were written by eyewitnesses. Others were collected from second and third-hand or generational sources. In every case, they were all different. So what was true? It's hard to say, although the core of the story, the main plot points, are similar. In my writing of the novel, I included as faithfully as I could all the documented scraps of the history and wove them together with my imagination so they fit. In such a manner I told a true story. At least my imaginative mind thinks so. 3. The victors write the history. We must remember that most of the time, with notable exceptions, it is the victors that write the history. Do the victors always tell the truth? No. There is bias in everything that is written. This is well known in so-called documentary films. There is always a point of view. 4. Fiction pretends to tell the truth. In all fiction, the storyteller pretends to tell the truth by writing in the imperative mood. That goes for everything from the dialogue to the title to the tagline. In other words, the storyteller, with regard to the physical events described, is lying. But the reader recognizes that, or should. If the reader understands historical fiction as true history, then the mistake is on the reader's part, not the author whose intention is to be entertaining. 5. Nonfiction history is the biased retelling of others. All historians, writing about events to which they were not eyewitnesses, are simply retelling what other historians have told. For instance, Shire's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, while a comprehensive account of Nazi Germany, is the retelling from 100 accounts of voluminous works written by others. Although the current historian is wanting to tell the truth, his truth is only as good as the previous historians or sources have handled the facts. Consequently, a great deal of history is presumption or imagined by the historian. 6. What is true is deeper than the physical story. The more important aspect of truth in storytelling is the internal moral truth that the story conveys. In a classical sense, the conveyance or story form is called a myth. While the outward physical story is fiction, about a donkey, a goose, and a frog talking to each other like human beings, the meaning of the story, or the moral premise, is true, or should be. This is the subject of my earlier book, The Moral Premise, Harnessing Virtue and Vice for Box Office Success. For instance, the movie Armageddon, about Bruce Willis traveling to an asteroid to blow it up before it can destroy Earth, is fiction, unless you know someone who has done that. But the moral premise of the story, about the sacrifices a good father makes for the future sake of his children, is true. So in summary, there are two ways historical fiction can be true as any documented history. A. The story threads the available historical documentation together and relates it all in a fundamentally cogent and reasonable way consistent with the time period. I'm sure many historical fiction writers believe that their telling is as true as any so-called history textbook written from a biased point of view, which they all are. And B, the story is about a true moral premise. That is, that natural law exists, and if it's not followed, hell is to pay. You can read more about the moral premise or my latest novel, The Wizard Cliff Haunting, a true early American ghost story, at my main website, stanwilliams.com. Until next time, as Jordan Peterson reminds us, tell the truth. At least, don't lie.